welcome to Cooler Than Homework, a Disney Channel original movie podcast. I'm Nicole Sweeney, and all through my childhood, I was very proud of the fact that I had never broken a bone, but I broke my first bone in my mid-20s at the City Museum in St. Louis, playing with my youngest sibling in a skateless skate park. And there is video of it.
I have so many follow-up questions. But that's not why we're here. I understand that, but I just have so many follow-up questions.
No follow-up questions, just introduction.
I am Matthew Gatos, and as a kid, I never broke anything. I fractured some things, but I was in a cast from my toes to my hip once because I tore the cartilage in my knee, and because I was a kid, they didn't trust me not to move it if I was just in a brace, so they put me in a giant cast for a whole summer.
My name is Marinés, and I've never broken a bone. I probably fractured a toe. I never went to get it confirmed because if you break a toe bone or fracture it, there's nothing they can do. They're just like, meh. Like there's no toe cast or whatever.
Right.
So I just lived with this, I don't know, messed up toe for a very long time. But otherwise, no broken bones.
And I'm Sari Riley, and I broke my left arm in first grade, falling off a ring set. And then I cried, and the school nurse didn't believe that I had broken a bone because she just thought I was a crying kid. And then my dad brought me to the hospital, and they were like, your bone's broken.
We are not here to talk about broken bones. We're here to talk about Rip Girls, which does feature a major character who is in a cast and can't go in the water. And that's it. That's the whole reason we did that. Mari, what is this movie actually about?
Okay, in 1999, 2000, that general time frame, someone worked at Disney who loved Hawaii and surfing and horses and also making me cry. I cried. So in this movie, 13-year-old Sydney Miller returns to Hawaii after she inherits a family home, a plantation. Sydney was born in Hawaii, but after her mother dies, her father moved her and remarried. Now that they're back, they have this realtor, Bo, who explains that Sydney had to come in person to inherit the home, and now she has to stay for 2 weeks. Like, a forced vacation is part of the inheritance, which, like, where's my inheritance like this? I don't know.
Inheritance and forced vacation.
All in one. Bo explains that the farmland in the plantation is still fertile, but the Millers are like, yeah, but what if we don't farm and we just sell it? Meanwhile, Sydney finds an old photo album and it has a picture of her mother holding a surfboard. Pretty much the first time she's learned that her mother used to surf. She then discovers an old barn on the property, and inside is a surfboard with the word Nani Loa inscribed on it. As she grabs the board and runs out of the barn, which is making a bunch of creepy barn noises, she runs into Gia, a local girl who is also into surfing. Sydney later asks for permission to hang out with Gia, but her father, Ben, is super overprotective in general and definitely does not want her to get in the water. Sydney promises to go and just take pictures of her new friends. And at the beach, Sydney brings the Naniloa board and pretends for a while that she can surf, but she's caught in her lie by a boy named Koa, who's wearing a cast because his arm is broken. He can't go surfing because he can't get it wet. It's bringing it full circle there. Sydney admits to him that she can't surf, so Gia and Kona teach her. The Millers meet with the realtors again and find out that they've got an offer from a company that wants to build a resort on the plantation. Sydney brings up a few concerns, like, destroying the historical buildings, but the realtors promise that they can negotiate everything, even the part where the beach will only belong to the guests. Sydney sneaks out again to surf, but after a successful ride, she gets worked by a wave and hits her head. Kona sees it happening from where he's skateboarding and runs to her rescue. They then take Sydney to Gia's mom's house so that her mother, Malia, can check her out and check out the cut on her head. Turns out that Malia and Sydney's mom used to be BFFs, and Naniloa was her nickname. Malia is surprised that Ben never mentioned like any of this, like, I don't know, her mother's name or like her mother's BFF or anything. Malia takes Sydney to a lagoon and explains about these whales that come to like mate here, but not now. Later, it's just like, look at this place and something's going to happen here later. Okay, bye. Malia brings Sydney back to the plantation and Ben is pissed. He sends Sydney to her room and then starts yelling at Malia for encouraging his daughter. Malia tells him that he can't protect Sydney forever, even if he did run away from Hawaii, and that also he needs to like let it go about Naniloa. His new wife, Elizabeth, is on hand to be like, yeah, she's right. I don't know what to do about you still being in love with your dead wife, because it's weird. The next day, now that she's bound from surfing, Sydney and Gia sit around and chat, and Gia reveals what we have had a feeling about this whole time, and that is that Naniloa drowned. Sydney later asks Kona and Gia to take her up to another abandoned plantation home where Naniloa used to live, and they find her old bedroom, which looks like it's been abandoned for 100 years instead of 10 years, but it's cool. That night, Gia and Kona come to get Sydney in the middle of the night because it's whale party time. There's dancing and storytelling, and Kona kisses Sydney, and then they all watch as the whales arrive. And meanwhile, Malia tells Sydney the rest of the story about how her mother died after getting caught in a swell. Sydney confesses that she's real mad at her mom for abandoning her, but Malia says that she needs to forgive her too. The local newspaper runs a story about the sale of the plantation and the upcoming resort. All of Gia's friends are rude to Sydney because of the news. Sydney finds Gia at her secret, dangerous surfing place where she comes to, like, I don't know, be calm, and tries to explain about all of the things that she's negotiated to preserve on the land, but Gia says that everything will still change. Out of nowhere, Sydney asks if Gia befriended her on purpose because of the plantation, and Gia admits that she did seek the friendship out on purpose, but things have changed now and they really are friends. Sydney feels like a fool and decides to sell the property and get the heck out of Hawaii. As Sydney is about to sign the paperwork, she conveniently can see that Gia and her friends are like right outside of the realtor's office window, like having fun and getting ready to surf. And we cut from there and see that Sydney tries to find Gia again and figures out that she's back at her sad, dangerous surfing secret location. And when Sydney gets there, she has a bad feeling, and indeed Gia's out there drowning. Sydney saves her and then breaks the news that she didn't sell the house, and in fact the Millers are moving to Hawaii. Everyone is happy, everyone is friends. There are so many of those freeze frames with the sound effect because Sydney is a photographer. The end.
Okay, so before we talk about this movie, Matt, where is this cast now?
Well, most of them are nowhere because apparently this was like a career-ending movie for some people. I don't blame the movie. It doesn't seem to be connected to the movie, but it's weird that like on IMDb, you know how people have pictures associated with their profiles. The majority of the cast does not have pictures. So you're just like, okay, they are not acting in a lot of things because they don't need a headshot on IMDb. And so many people did like one or two things after this movie and then just stopped, or this was the only thing they ever did. And I'm like, that's strange because this doesn't seem like a movie that would like ruin careers in any way, but just a weird coincidence, I think. That being said, we do have a few people in this movie who are still doing things and who some of you probably recognize.
Some of you.
I say some. Yeah. I say some of you, meaning not Sari.
Correct.
So let's start off with someone who didn't do much after this, but I also can't verify that this is actually what he's up to now because I found an Instagram that I think is him. It was kind of hard to tell, but that's Brian Stark, who plays Kona, the boy in the cast. Seems to just be a normal dude now. He possibly is selling Lego Nintendo art on his Instagram and Etsy pages. Again, it seemed like it's him. I was doing a lot of like side-by-side face comparisons because he doesn't post enough selfies to really have a good angle on this thing, but it seemed like it's probably him. But again, I've been burned before because sometimes when you Google these people, it'll have all their info and then a link to their Instagram page. And you're like, okay, someone must have done the research. And you click that and it just happens to be someone with the same name. So Brian Stark doesn't sound like that uncommon of a name.
Right.
This could just be a random man who's selling Nintendo Lego art. But if not, then that's what he's doing. Next up, we have Keone Young, who plays Bo, who's the realtor / guy who just stands in the corner shaking his head disapprovingly.
Correct.
Because until Mari was talking about him, I forgot he was the realtor. I just was like, he welcomes them there and then stands in the side going like, oh, I don't know about this. So I didn't remember what his role was in this film. But he's one of those men who is just in everything, like those side characters and DCOMs often are. So you've most likely seen him in something. He has like 244 credits on IMDb. I immediately recognized him from a weird episode of Boy Meets World, which is my brain. But he has also been in things like Deadwood, True Blood, Cheers, Boy Meets World, Golden Girls, Alias, Dude, Where's My Car? But he's also voiceover artist in Star Wars Rebels, Avatar The Last Airbender, Archer, and just, yeah, this guy has been acting since like the 70s or 80s and is consistently still acting in so many things that I'm guessing you've probably seen him at some point, even if you don't remember. Next up, we have Stacey Hess, who plays Gia, the best friend in this. Rip Girls is the only movie she ever did. It turns out she was a model in Hawaii before getting the role of Gia, and she is now continued to be a model, a photographer, and a very, very high-end jewelry designer. But yeah, she seems to be incredibly successful at all of these things. She, at least according to her online presence and interviews I saw done with her on other websites. But yeah, so she's still killing it with the modeling and photography. Ironically, she is, I saw a lot of photography of people on the beach and surfing. So she took on the role that Sydney was hoping to do in life. And then lastly, amongst this cast, we have our star of the film, Camilla Bell, playing Sydney Miller. I feel like I should know more of her work than I do. I mostly recognize her from playing the little girl at the beginning of Jurassic Park: The Lost World, who gets eaten by all the tiny little dinosaurs. But I was curious what you guys know her from most.
I mostly know her as she is a famous person more than she is famous for anything in particular. I was thinking about this while I was watching it too, because I was like, this is definitely somebody that Sari is not going to know. And It will make sense to me that she won't know her, because it's like she had this moment. She dated Joe Jonas is like the thing that I know most about her is that she dated Joe Jonas right after Taylor Swift. And like in that sort of period in the mid 2000s, she was poised to have this like moment as an it girl, but all the roles that she took on were in these very nothing action movies that that nobody remembers, that nobody really watched or cared about at the time. And so that moment kind of like fizzled out and passed. So I feel like I know her more as a red carpet or like gossip magazine presence than I do as an actual actress.
Yeah, I know her from this. Like, I knew her as the actress from Rip Girls. So when she came back up, like a little older around that time, I was like, oh, it's the girl from Disney Channel. So I don't know. I feel like she's always been in the periphery. Like, I'm looking at her list of movies and I'm like, I don't think I've ever seen any of these.
Except for the all-important classic Rip Girls.
Exactly. But she's like, I don't know. She's places. I've seen her before on red carpets and things.
Yeah, that was my thing, was like looking at her films. I was like, okay, she was in 10,000 BC. She was in When a Stranger Calls. She's in Dirty Dancing 3. And I'm like, these are films that I knew existed, but never would have seen. And yeah, upon researching her further of like, how do I know this person? I found out that she did famously feud with Taylor Swift when Camilla, quote unquote, stole Joe Jonas from her on the set of the music video for Love Bug, which Camilla Bell is the star of. And yeah, that was the whole, I don't know if anyone else remembers this, but there was a famous story that Joe Jonas broke up with Taylor Swift in a 27-second phone call from the set of Love Bug after he met Camilla Bell. And then Taylor Swift went on to write a song called Better Than Revenge that is pretty harsh. I'm gonna just go out there and say it, because the lyrics are, she's not a saint and she's not what you think. She's an actress. She's better known for the things that she does on the mattress.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Yep.
And soon she's going to find stealing other people's toys in the playground won't make you many friends. So she should keep in mind, there's nothing I do better than revenge.
I feel like it is relevant context that they're all like 18 at this moment in time, but like very famous 18-year-olds.
Correct.
So it's like having to be a messy 18-year-old in a very public fashion. I feel like it's none of this is a good look for anybody.
Yeah. She called Joe Jonas her toy on the playground, which is great for Joe Jonas.
That context is important, because not knowing any of this and just having it all divorced from context, it's like, I know these names, I know these people vaguely, and now they're married and have careers and things like that. But yes, if someone published my high school notebooks, I too would be very embarrassed for how dramatic I was.
Yeah, Taylor Swift commented on this song like a few years ago, saying, "I was 18 when I wrote that. That's the age you are when you think someone can actually take your boyfriend. Then you grow up and realize no one can take something from you if they don't want to leave." But Camilla Bell apparently maybe didn't let this go over the years.
Oh no. Camilla.
Yeah. So a few years ago, when the whole T-Swift, Kanye, Kardashian feud was coming to a head, and Kim Kardashian was posting phone calls from Taylor Swift on Snapchat, and these are all words I have to say right now. When that was all happening, Camilla Bell posted on Twitter the quote, "No need for revenge. Just sit back and wait. Those who hurt you will eventually screw up themselves. And if you're lucky, God will let you watch."
Amazing.
I mean, this tracks though, because again, like my sense of her as a person is like, is this kind of thing. Like, this is what I know her for, is this stuff, not for movies.
I mean, also though, if I were 18 and I just like showed up for a job on a music thing, and then some boy got like obsessed with me, and then someone made a song about how all I know how to do is on the mattress, yeah, I'd hold on to that shit. I would wait for my moment to be like, aha. Taylor Swift tripped, whatever it would be, I would hold on to it forever. I'm just saying.
But I mean, she is 30 when she's posting the revenge quote. So
don't care. How many millions of people listen to that song? I'm just saying. Like,
oh, that's true. Yeah, that's fair.
That's true. I agree wholeheartedly. Team Haunt Earth. I'm wearing the shirt too, so I'm like, yes. I would be floating around being like, you were mean to me once.
Correct.
Suck it.
Yeah. Team Haunt Earth is a little bit petty, so we are now also Team Camilla.
Yes. Yeah. Team Camilla, you're reasonable, actually. You go, girl.
First of all, nostalgia check. Do you remember watching this as a kid?
Nope.
Yes.
No.
And definitely no.
Okay, so did you guys like this movie? Mari cried.
Yeah, I cried. I mean, I cry a lot, so, you know. But I did like this movie. I thought that it was good. If you start comparing it, like if I compare it to other sports DComs, like, I don't know that it's better than like Johnny Tsunami or Brink. It's probably better than the bowling one. And then on the other side, like if I compare it to other horse movies, this is way better than the Lawrence Brothers one, I think. So I don't know. It's like kind of in the middle for me. I did think that it was a little slow at points, but then they would throw in a scene with the adults that would make me cry because of the like dead wife and mother thing. So I thought it was surprisingly sad and I don't know, not dark, but they talked a lot about this woman who died and who like they told the whole story of how she died in trying to like swim back to the ocean or whatnot. It just felt very heavy. I don't know if it was just for like a Saturday morning because I just watched this, but in general, it felt a little heavier than like a DCOM that wasn't about racism in South Africa. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, I agree. I also couldn't figure out where to place it. I dragged it around my list until it felt right and ended up putting it slightly above middle. It's at 7 right now, right below Xenon, which is low compared to everyone else. For Xenon, that is. Rip Girls, who knows where everyone's putting it. But I felt like the adults were the most complicated characters in this story, which was interesting for a DCOM because usually, and yes, the story centered around Sydney and her decision to, or like her figuring out her mom's life and making friends on this island. But really, a lot of the drama was happening with the adults having realizations about like not keeping secrets from their children, and this stepmom being a very good stepmom and like trying to talk to her family, being like, what do you expect me to do here? I'm part of this life, but I'm competing with a ghost. And her mom's best friend sort of manipulating her child to be like, well, here, this girl has the future of our island in her hands, so maybe become friends with her and see, like, let's be nice to her because that's all we can do to protect our home if this stranger is coming in and has decision. I don't know. It was interesting to me that I cared less about Sydney's story than everyone else's. And but also, that being said, like, I agree that there were some slow parts. I agree that like I was bored by some things, but it was like a good movie. I would watch it again.
Yeah, see, for me, I think similarly, it's in the middle of my list. I think we're going to run into that a lot when we're going through so many of these of like, well, it's not terrible, so where does it go? I ended up thinking about the same thing. I was dragging it up and down my spreadsheet list and was like, well, Under Wraps made me laugh more than this did, but it was better than Horse Sense. So it gets a solid number 10 on my list so far because I would rather watch Under Wraps again, but definitely not watch Horse Sense again. But for me, I mean, I feel similar to both of you that the parents are much more interesting, especially Gia's mom is, well, one, she's, I think, the best actress in the entire thing. But early on, I think the movie struggles like in the first half, partially because of the writing and acting not being spectacular. It feels like we're relying so heavily on these kids to carry the film when one is literally not an actress, like she's never been in anything else before or after, and the other one had only been in a few things before this. And when the writing is not there to support them, it just kind of felt empty, and I felt like they were just sitting there reading their lines back and forth sometimes. I also kind of felt like, me personally, I was way ahead of the kids on a lot of the story beats where I was sitting there saying, like, if her mom did not die in a surfing accident, her dad is just a dick. And still, he's kind of a dick.
Yes.
But the level to which he is overprotective and like mad at her for the smallest things was very clearly leading to the fact that her mom must have died surfing. The fact that that isn't revealed until like almost like 3/4 of the way through the movie is very bizarre because it feels so obvious so early on, and then it just keeps drawing it out. And I got like more and more angry the more it would draw it out. And I'm like mostly angry at the dad of like, you never talked to your kid about her mother. And then when she is 13 and your new wife suggests that maybe, you know, talk to her about this stuff, your answer to that is like, well, what do you want to know? And it's like, everything maybe? Like, don't just like start with the bare bones. Like, you're going to need to tell your daughter a lot. And that would have solved so many of your problems earlier on in life. So I don't know, that kind of was frustrating to me. And it didn't, like, by the time I started enjoying it, we were already like in the last half of the movie. And it didn't really like make up for the first half of the movie.
Yeah, the dad is like very frustrating. Like, I did not have as many problems with it as it sounds like you did. I feel closer to Sari in terms of the way that I generally felt about this movie. But I will say that yes, it was incredibly obvious really early on where we were going with it, like why he was being the way that he was. And also it was like frustrating to watch because I kept thinking about and being really aware of the fact that like they went on this whole trip to Hawaii and he didn't even like leading into this trip, didn't think to tell her anything about her mother. And like, I don't know, there's also the the unintentional subtext of the movie that is like white dad keeps Hawaiian heritage from his daughter. I don't know. There's just like layers to the dad stuff that that really bothered me. That was also the thing that I hated most about Johnny Tsunami was the dad. I think that the fact that this dad has like grief issues, whereas the Johnny Tsunami dad just like didn't like his cool dad.
Yeah, my dad's too cool. I don't like him.
I hate it.
All my friends like him more than me.
For that reason, that was my sort of big as I was going back and forth because it's right next to Johnny Tsunami, and I've been sitting here like putting it back and forth between those two movies. But yeah, I don't know. I feel like there were a number of story beats that landed in like weird ways that were ultimately actually super interesting. Like this question of all of the kids befriending her because of because of her inheritance or whatever is an interesting element to the story. Like there are a lot of really interesting elements to the story, but they all feel kind of like rushed through.
Yeah, definitely. Especially that one.
It's interesting to me because I feel that some of this stuff is more writing than anything else, especially like Sydney's lines. She was always delivering like big speeches about like her feelings and stuff where I was just like, oh my gosh. But overall, I did feel for the character as much as like the parents and that the grief stuff was like anytime that there's any sort of exploration of grief, like I'm immediately like, what are you saying? I'm interested. And so I kind of understood that part of the dad story. But for Sydney, the way that she was, or she grew up to be like a little bit embarrassed always. And she was trying, like, there was so many things that, I don't know, felt a little more subtle in terms of her being like, you let me look like a fool. Like that sort of thing was always what she was worried about. Like she pretended to know how to surf. She was a little, her dad was overprotective, but she grew up in this way that you could see her like, nope, not trying that again. And I was like, wow, like, like an easily embarrassed, scared girl. Like I see why I like this as a kid. That would have also been me. So there were things about her character that I thought were done well, even if a lot of her lines were just clunky and very like, I don't know, ham-fisted, probably because they couldn't rely on this child actress to just like do the genius thing. What's the actress name where she just emoted a lot? And you're like, that's great. Camila Bell was not there. So they were giving her lines about her feelings that just were a little clunky.
I think they also had a thing where they had some really good ideas for like one-off lines or speeches for her and other characters, but then didn't have the rest of the conversation thought out. And so there's multiple scenes in this movie where a character says something like a pretty impactful, big, thoughtful line, and the other character just goes like, yeah, or says nothing, and they cut to the next scene. And I'm like, really? We're not getting the rest of that conversation? Like there's multiple things where it's like near the end when Sydney she's going to tell Gia that she's not going to sell the property and they're going to stay. She goes to her house and Gia's not there, but she talks to her mom, Malia, who is very important to this story and had a whole history and is one of the like architects of the plan to make sure that they didn't sell this thing. And they talk very deeply about this, almost up to the point where Sydney should definitely be saying, oh, by the way, I'm not selling this land you love. But instead, she leaves to go look for Gia first. And I'm like, why does that conversation not continue for just two more lines of just like, well, I've got some good news to tell her. And then she leaves. Like Malia just has to like sit there still believing that this land is being sold to a resort.
Crying embrace it list because she gave it away. And painting sadly.
I love Malia. I would like to be her when I grow up. Just like a very cool living on the beach. Just seems like she just paints and raises her daughter and surfs sometimes, which is A+. Single mom in Hawaii.
Wow, really love her. She's really doing great things. It's Maria's point about like the elements of this character that feel like kind of relatable, I think are also interesting in terms of all the big clunky speeches. Like yes, they are like there's just a lot, but also I feel like this girl is sort of quiet and solitary. Like her hobbies are photography and like computer stuff. Like her hobbies are things that she does like very kind of on her own, and she's a 13-year-old girl. So I feel like I also was kind of that 13-year-old girl and also had like a lot of very melodramatic feelings. So like even the clunkiness of those lines, I'm like, yeah, that, you know, that feels ridiculous, but also not implausible.
Yes, the I hate you, I hate all of you on the beach scene. I was like, yeah, that's not unrealistic.
Yes.
For sure.
Especially when her big problem is that her parents have been, or her dad specifically, has been lying to her this whole time. And then she found out that he was lying. And then now her new friends, who are maybe the only, I don't know, she doesn't seem very attached to her friends in Chicago if she's willing to move to Hawaii all of a sudden. So the first like real friends that she had then betrayed her in the same way. That'd be pretty traumatic as a 13-year-old.
I will say that this is weird because they're 13-year-olds and I'm a 30-year-old woman. So I don't know what the right word to use is, but the little like love interest thing I thought was cute, especially because said in so many words. Like she was like, I like that guy. And then Gia was like, oh, he'd be stoked. And I don't know, that sort of like open communication about it and the way that, you know, they were hanging out with each other. I thought that was well done. A lot of times when you have like love interest things, it's like don't look under the bed style where they come out of nowhere and you're like, whoa, why is this happening? But they actually teased it out in a way that I was like, that's cute. I see it.
And I also really appreciated the friendship between Gia and Kona, where it wasn't like that could have so easily been made into like a love triangle situation. But instead it was like, no, we've like grown up together. He knows he's like great to talk to. And I'm so excited that you have a crush on him because, yeah, he's great to talk to. And I'm like, he'd be excited. And as his friend, I'm so thrilled for you. And that felt like a very mature thing to include in a kid's movie, and also a good like perspective to have that, yes, you can just be friends with people and like encourage your friends' blossoming relationships or whatever, and like live your life and not have to like fall in love necessarily.
Yeah, I was really afraid of a jealousy angle coming out of that, of like, oh, Kona starts spending so much time with Sydney that he's not spending time with Gia, and then Gia reveals that like, well, I liked him first, blah, blah, blah. And I was like so happy that every time we saw like the Gia-Kona relationship, it was purely a friendship and purely excited for each other.
And the fact that, like, back to Mari's point about the open communication, the fact that they made that clear really early on, that like right away they were like, nope, we're not doing that. This is not going to be the love triangle thing. Like Sydney is expressing interest. Her friend is saying like, oh, cool, I have no interest and I am happy for you. Like, go.
I do have some small, very petty issues with this film.
We love small petty issues.
Great. I have a handful. Number one, early on, when they started doing the freeze-framey picture-taking thing, I was like, oh God, it's Alley Cat Strike all over again. We learned how to freeze-frame a movie, and so we're going to do it every 5 seconds. And so early on, my thought was like, these pictures better be really important, or like the idea of her being a photographer better become really important in this movie, because they spend so much time early on pointing out that she's a photographer. And it doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things much at all.
No, it does not matter at all.
No, but the one thing about that made me more upset was the angle of the photos that she was getting. Especially early on, she's like taking photos from far away, like kind of creeping on these people. But yet some of the photos that we get in the freeze frame are like on the surface of the water, under the rip curl, looking right at these surfers in their face. And I'm like, that's impossible, especially because we later point out that you've not been in the water surfing, and that Gia specifically is like, oh, it would be great to get some photos from the water. And I'm like, well, she already kind of did by magic. And then the same thing ends up happening like later on. Every time she's taking pictures, they are like impossible angles, so much so that at the end, during the big montage where she's taking pictures of all of her friends, there's one of them where she's in the picture.
Yep.
Like, you can see her in the bottom of the frame taking a picture as they go ka-chink and like take a picture of the screen. And it's like, no, how did you mess that up that badly? So yeah, that was just one of my little nitpicky things. I got two more small ones, very brief. One, she's immediately dry once she gets out of the water the first time. Because I was like, how is she going to lie to her parents about not going in the water when she's soaking wet? And then you see her like with a towel and she's bone dry. And I was like, oh, well, I guess it won't be too hard. And then the last nitpicky thing I have was just her Photoshop skills, or rather the ability of Photoshop and what it can do. Because when she's photoshopping a picture of her and her mother together, which is a very sweet moment, and I don't want to take away from that, but the abilities of Photoshop are like crime shows in the 90s where it's like edit, enhance, enlarge, blah, blah, blah. And there's just like a delete background button and then a repair the photo button. And I'm like, man, Photoshop would be so easy to use if there was just a like repair this photo button. So yeah, those are just my small little like more like technology based nitpicks of this film.
Incredible. This is what I sound like when I'm nitpicking science.
Yes.
But when it comes to cameras, I'm like, I don't know. Enhance button, enhance.
Enhance, damn it.
This week, in honor of Sydney learning like a whole huge chunk of her family history, we are talking about some of our own favorite family stories. Matt, what you got?
So I will preface this by saying that mine, like Sydney's, is also a little sad and heavy and dark as well. I'll keep it as light as I possibly can with the content that exists within the story. So this is basically the story of why my mom and my grandma are complete and total badasses. And a lot of that stems from the fact that in 1967, 20 years before I was born, my mom's dad died in a tornado, which is a bizarre way to go. And it's one of those things that when I talk to people about their grandparents or like it's a situation that I'm in where I have never had a living grandfather that I have known. And part of that is because my grandfather died 20 years before I was born in a very bizarre way. Again, in a tornado, which is not the way most people go. Mm-hmm. But with this happening, at the time when that happened, my mom was like 13 and she is one of 9 children. So this left my grandma, who at the time was like 47 years old, as a single mother of 9 children. And largely, I think because of that, my grandma, who I was very close to throughout life, was a total badass and also raised my mom to be a total badass as well, who raised me mostly as a single mom when I was younger. And I think it's one of those things of it's a horrible tragedy that happened to them. But at the end of the day, you can see how they grew through it and how like they came out the other side, and the sort of like, if there is any possible silver lining to be found, it is the people they have become because of it. Mm-hmm. And I feel very lucky to have been raised by those two women who are both great.
It's a Saturday morning and I wish I had like a stiff drink right now so that I could drink to your mom and to your grandma, because truly two badass, amazing, a single mom of 9. Just wow. This is me pretending to drink right now.
Yes.
I also have a grandma related story. So this is the story of my I guess my grandma in general. So growing up in the Dominican Republic, she had a a boyfriend while she was growing up, but then she wasn't really accepted by his family, and he ended up moving away. And several years later, he came back to where they grew up and was like, listen, I got away from my parents. I want to marry you. Let's do it tomorrow. Like, run away from home, run away with me. And so she was like, cool, I love him. I'm going to do this. And she ends up running away with him. And then when he basically had set up like a house for her and everything, and when they got there, there was even like a priest waiting to marry them, the whole thing. And when she got there, basically she found out, or he confessed that when he left, he had already been married. So he has a wife already. And so she basically got set up as his mistress. She couldn't return home because back in those days, like, they would have assumed that she had lost her virginity and she wouldn't be able to get back home. So she ended up having to live as my grandfather's mistress for a very long time. And so my grandmother had 5 kids, including my mother, and my grandfather had 10 kids with his actual wife. So there were 15 in total. And so like, after having the 5 kids, my grandmother basically found Jesus. She converted. And so she started feeling really bad about being somebody's mistress. And so she ended up calling my grandfather's brother to saying, like, can you help me get out of the situation? And they ended up finding a way to get her to the US, but she had to leave her kids, including my mom. So she ran away from my grandfather, came to New York in the US, worked as a seamstress for many, many years, but in the beginning, enough to get herself her own place, and then one by one bring her children over. So my grandmother was also a badass. She never remarried. And at her funeral several years back, all of her kids talked about how she loved my grandfather until the end, and basically just never remarried because, I don't know, she was the dad in Rip Curls. Like, she never got over it, what happened to her. But she raised all 5 of her kids in New York City in the 60s and 70s. So, yeah, she was an amazing woman. Really weird story about how some man convinced her to run away from home.
I wanted to tell a mom story. I was like, okay, this was like a thing about her learning about her mom and whatever. But I got distracted when you guys started telling grandma stories. Mari's is a really hard one to follow. But my grandma had a, I don't know, like really weird and interesting early adulthood, I guess. She was a like competitive touring table tennis player. And that is part of how she and my grandpa met. So my grandpa was stationed in Germany. This is like post World War II. But so he was stationed in Germany, and she was there, like she went to play table tennis, like to entertain the troops kind of deal. And I was thinking about this, and I was like trying to think about how to frame that as like a larger story. But then I Googled her, and I like I have spent the last like 5 minutes looking at old photos of my grandma that I found on like eBay. 1950 press photo table tennis champ in self-designed costume. It's a cute costume. I'm gonna put this picture up in the
show notes
in the blog post, because it's like a very cute costume that she designed herself. In her little pose as she's
that's amazing.
The table tennis champ. So this isn't really like a story per se. Just me babbling about my grandma being a table tennis champion who made herself cute costumes.
Oh my god, that is adorable.
Right?
Look at her go. I'd wear that shit today. Go, grandma.
Right?
Man, everyone go Google your grandma right now and see if she was cool.
Right. But also, like, the fact that I can buy this photo of her on eBay for $20 is wild to me.
You should get it.
You should be like, hey, you should give me that photo.
No, I'm going to buy it. I'm going to buy this $20 photo of my grandmother.
Yeah, because it's under collectible sports celebrity photos too.
Yeah.
So before this, on the email thread that we have before recording every episode, I'm like, my family doesn't really talk about what happened or each other. So that's what I'm coming from. So I have no idea. My conception of a lot of my family members is like, since I was born, that's what they did. And I don't know what happened beforehand. So I don't know if any of my grandparents were sports stars or anything. I tried Googling them. Nothing came up. But in the vein of moms and grandmas, what I do know about my mom is she was born in Malaysia. She also has a lot of siblings, like between 8 and 9, I think. And her parents died when they were very young. And so her oldest brothers and sisters ended up like taking over and raising the family. And I think she's on the younger end of the family. And she was the only member of her family to, I think, take consistent English classes and then get a scholarship from the country of Malaysia to like go away to college and then come back and teach. So she went to school in Canada, got a bachelor's in business or something like that, and then went back to teach for a little bit. And this is where it starts getting really fuzzy because I have a very fraught relationship with my mom. She's never going to listen to this podcast. And so I just don't know a lot of these things. But she either defected from the Malaysian government or like finished her term. One of them is like much more dramatic than the other. But either way, she like finished doing that, was like, I don't want to be a teacher anymore. And then she went to, that's when she immigrated to the United States, met my dad in college, and then basically has been a working mom ever since. And so I think at some point in her life, she spoke like 4 different languages, at least, between Indonesian and Chinese and English and French, possibly with French Canada, and like has traveled all over the place and just like left her home country and all of her family to go explore the world, which is very cool. And even though growing up I was very resistant to draw parallels, it's like, that's why I leave all the time and I like just hop on a plane and go somewhere else to college or like want to explore. It's probably some degree of nature in there that I came from a mother who just was like, yeah, I'm going to do whatever.
Sari has got the exploration kind of feelings. Nicole is sewing, so she got that from her grandma. Matt, are you badass? Is that what you're bringing from this story?
I mean, I wrote a song about that family story once, so that's kind of carrying on the legacy, I guess. But yeah.
You do what you can.
Yeah.
I think all I got from my grandma was like that degree of like holding on to things where she's like, I'm never marrying again. As we said, Team Petty. That is.
Nicole, can I ask, do you play table tennis ever?
No.
And when you do, are you like,
No.
well, I'll never be professional at this?
The second one is why the answer to the first one is no. The bar is too high. I am not interested in engaging in this activity. Matt and I have talked a number of times. We talked about it in the last episode of the podcast, but about like trying all the things as a kid. And part of why I always quit everything is that when I wasn't like immediately good at it, I was dissatisfied. I was like, I'm not good at this. I don't want to do it. So that's me in table tennis. And now it is time to share the lessons that we learned from Rip Girls.
I learned, because of a very specific line in this movie, that you can't fight a ghost.
That was sweet. I laughed because I just imagined punching a ghost, but now that's on permanent record as me laughing at death. I learned that you don't surf for your friends, you surf for yourself.
I learned that if you surf, you have a really high chance of drowning. There are like 3 people drowned in this movie, so I'm not going to do that.
I didn't really learn this from this movie or like honestly even like learn this for real just now, but I feel really pleased that like everyone, that we've all learned the depths of Team Haunt Earth's pettiness.
You don't know the depths yet. I feel like there's much more to explore.
And now, to close out the podcast, it is time for Sari to guess the plot of the next movie. Next time on Cooler Than Homework, we are watching Miracle in Lane 2.
No. Okay, here's what I know. It's a sports movie because I've strayed too far with the alley cats. This sound. Sports have lanes, and I don't know what else would. The problem is, I don't know what sports have lanes besides bowling, and we already very clearly had a bowling sports movie. So my next instinct, the problem is I didn't do sports. Besides fencing, and I know you don't call those lanes, and so I have no reference points.
I'm going to throw you a bonus and tell you the first line of the Wikipedia for this, which says that this movie was originally called something else. The original title of this movie was Wheelies.
I don't think that helps.
Okay, I'm trying to reconcile these two now because I was about to say it was like a track and field movie because those look kind of like lanes. That's like the closest thing to lanes.
They do have lanes. That is a correct observation about the sport.
Yes, Nicole, whose grandpa was a track coach.
Yes.
Okay. Miracle in Lane 2 plus Wheelies. Is this like a Paralympics movie, maybe, where someone who is a track star and whose lucky lane is lane 2 and very fast and good and maybe did things like hurdles and batons, gets in a tragic accident where maybe it's it's a sports movie, not supernatural. When Nicole and I ran the Disney marathon, this is a tangent, but it's a very important one. When Nicole and I ran the Disney World Dopey Challenge, on the first day, they interviewed a woman who had been attacked by a hippopotamus and then recovered and then was now doing the Dopey Challenge. So my first, I had such a powerful instinct to say that this child is a girl who got attacked by a hippopotamus, and I know that's incorrect. But
it's what is speaking to you.
It's what's speaking to me. So there's this girl. I want to say it, but I know it's going to be wrong. Okay.
I will tell you a little extra hint is that it's based on a true story.
Okay. Her hippo story
this
was
woman
a true
in real
story.
life got attacked by a hippopotamus. It was a true story. She didn't lie. And then her husband dressed up as a hippo and ran beside her. It was very weird. We were tired and startled all at the same time. Okay, so this girl named Samantha, track star, lane 2, gets in a car accident and becomes paralyzed from the waist down and is now relearning to do her running in a wheelchair and adjusting to missing her legs or missing the mobility of her legs and watching her friends run and then feeling accomplished. And then she wins the big race or something. I feel like I got enough hints. I don't deserve the tagline. So that's end movie.
The tagline wouldn't have helped you anyway. The tagline was Justin tried for a trophy. What he won was extraordinary. I guess I would have told you the kid was named Justin.
Justin, yeah, not Samantha. So, well, tragic.
Well, find out what actually happened to Justin next time on Cooler Than Homework. If you are enjoying this podcast, tell your friends, rate and review it. We would love to hear all of your thoughts about Rip Girls. There will be a post dedicated to this episode up at snarksquad.com/decom, or you can find us all on Twitter at decomsquad. I am at Sweeney Says.
I am at Matthew Gatos.
You can find me at My Name is Martinez.
And I'm at C.E. Riley.
This podcast is a Snark Squad production, edited by me, transcribed by Mari, and our theme music is by Stefan Shin.